Hey thinkers, welcome to this week's Thinking Podcast. This is your host, Jeffrey Wu, and I'm excited to have Dr. Ted Achacoso here with us today. And he goes by Dr. Ted, and he's built up quite an interesting framework and practice around anti-aging, just very similar to how we think about biohacking in terms of optimizing performance as opposed to necessarily just curing just deficiencies as a therapeutic. So before diving too much into his theories, I'd like him to introduce himself and give his 2 cents on how he would describe his practice the best. So Dr. Ted, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Ted Achacoso, and 8 years ago, when I finished my training in anti-aging medicine and nutritional medicine in Paris, I was struck by the fact that we were still using the concepts of anti-aging medicine using hormones and nutritional medicine using nutrients to diagnose and treat disease. Right. And I said, how come no one's focusing on health? All right. So I created this little framework called Health Optimization Medicine, or HOME for short. In fact, our slogan is, let's bring medicine home, right? Where instead of diagnosing and treating diseases, why don't we detect and correct imbalances in the metabolome before you could actually see disease, or right. When a patient has disease already, then you actually help hasten the process of healing.
Yeah.
So the question in my mind was, I remember when I was a medical student, they used to ask me, okay, Dr. Ted, what's your disease management? And I'd like 2 questions actually to be asked of medical students is, what is your disease management? And the second question is, what is your health management? So that got me to looking at all of the different types of medicine, allopathic medicine, which is the way we practice medicine now, Western right. medicine. There's alternative medicine, complementary medicine, functional medicine, and these all diagnose and treat disease, yes. right? And the reason why there is this friction between functional medicine and illness medicine is because they diagnose and treat disease.
Right.
So I said, well, why don't we make it inclusive? I said, why don't we have a framework that just detects and corrects imbalances, and any side effects that you get from balancing is a beneficial side effect.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, actually. I mean, just to interject here, yeah. I think when the definition of medicine is diagnosis, treatment, prevention of disease, right? Yeah. And disease is very specific to deficiency, to norm.
Yes.
But even then, the definition of normal, healthy is a very fuzzy, amorphous term. Right? Like 100, 200 years ago, the average lifespan was, 40, 50. Now it's 80. So even the definition of healthy has evolved over time.
Yes. And what I wanted to do is to be inclusive with illness medicine doctors. I was there once. Right. I mean, I'm a trained interventional neuroradiologist. Right. I trained in pharmacology. So, I have training in neurology. So I said, why don't we have a definite set of ranges for what comprises as optimal levels right. for an individual? Because if you diagnose and treat, you do tests, right? So ripping a page from the playbook, I said, well, okay, let's detect and correct imbalances. And the imbalances that we could readily measure now, which were not measurable about 25 years ago, right. is, the metabolites in your Krebs Cycle, for example, yep. or your neurotransmitters, and right. all of these other metabolites can be measured now. Yes. Unfortunately, we are still stuck with the things that we used to measure before. For example, clinical metabolomics is now 25 years old, and yet it hasn't found its way right. To medical schools. And doctors are actually afraid to get back to it because they squeaked by biochemistry. And, it's like bad news. The things that you just used to memorize before, we can now measure them. Right?
Yeah.
But what I'm actually after is like not looking at the metabolites themselves, but what are the cofactors that actually influence them.
Right.
And this is why I like measuring your micronutrient levels. Okay. For example, your levels of fat-soluble vitamins, right. your cofactors like your CoQ10,
right. So to help explain a little bit of the details here, so the Krebs cycle is how our body generates, or how our mitochondria generate ATP, the energy currency for cells. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of these pathways, cofactors, that are steps in terms of passing electrons through the the proton gradient. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's multiple steps in the
Yes.
Krebs cycle.
And that's the thing is that we can geek out on all of the details of that, but ultimately when a client is in front of me, I call them clients because they're not sick, right?
Right.
When a client is in front of you, you have to know what to give your client, right? So I hate these advertisements that this vitamin is good for you, that vitamin is good for you, and you fight all over whatever mineral. Why don't you just test for their levels? And you test for their levels, and then when they're deficient, then replace them. If there's too much, then take it out.
Yeah,
you know?
manipulate. Manipulate the biometrics.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So because we're heavy into quantification now, right? So and these tests are now readily available, so we can do that. However, a big part of the whole process, especially for hormones, for example, is that of course they're part of your metabolome, which is heavily used for anti-aging. Is that we have to establish the actual optimal ranges for this, and there are three ranges that have been proposed that I know. One that is used by Terry Hertog, the pioneer in bioidentical hormone balancing. He's out from Brussels, and he was my mentor in this whole thing, and he uses the average value at 25 years old. Okay, so the age range is between 29 and 30. Yeah. 21 and 30 years old.
Okay.
Right? You have to shift the values to that level. Then there's Mark Gordon, who proposes a median value, and there's me proposing the 75th to the 50th to 75th percentile from age 21 to 30. So this has to be established
So like
per
you're
country.
saying above average of your demographic.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you have a 40-year-old, for example, or a 60-year-old, many of my clients are CEOs, or having positions of power, so they're usually older. And you try to move their levels closer to the values between 21 and 30. However, the science of that is that you can detect the levels, you try to push it, but the art of it is that all of these are network. Hormones are in a network. You touch one, everything else moves. Nutrients are in a network. You raise the levels of vitamin E, and suddenly your antioxidant regeneration pathway gets fucked. I'm sorry.
No, let's keep it like dynamic. No, I agree. Like the body wants to stay in homeostasis. It's very hard to just shift one thing.
It's always in dynamic equilibrium.
Right.
So, and that's systems biology, right? Everything's a network. So the technique that I devise is actually network range shifting, meaning the entire sub-network of say hormones, a sub-network of nutrients are moved down to the level when you were 21 to 30 years old. So that's the art of that, because you don't know what is going to move, right? And then
I think that's what you bring up is interesting on the ranges, because if you look at the definitions today, like the ranges are so broad.
Yes.
And a lot of more forward-thinking practitioners are looking at it like these are, like you're not clearly diabetic, but or you're not clearly sick, but like these are not optimal ranges.
This is actually very interesting when I deliver lectures to doctors, especially in Asia. I do have a practice in Manila. I'm there 30 days every quarter, and it's really very interesting when they ask you, are these relevant to Filipinos? And I go, how do you know that what you're using for your illness medicine patients are relevant for their patients? So I attended this lecture once a few years ago where this guy was expounding on laboratory values and where they came from. And he said, he tells this story about the thyroid hormones, right? He said, it's the average of 1,000 patients between age 3 to 94.
Right.
So I am 55, really, you're going to put me in those ranges? So there has to be that optimal range that has to be there. Alarmingly, though, there was a study that was presented a couple of years ago, a very large cohort study of normal males and females aged 21 to 30 in Europe, and already they're finding severe deficiencies in testosterone, menstrual abnormalities because of hormonal disturbances and so on, and defining the roles of endocrine disruptors in the environment. And so where do we have to choose some range somewhere, right? So for me, the art of it is that you try to push it as close as possible to those ranges, but you stop when the patient says or the client says, I already feel good at this range. And what's interesting is that prevention is always in hindsight, right? If no one bombed the World Trade Center, then, you never know the great lengths that were an effort that was put
Right.
in order to prevent that bombing, right? Preventive health is the same way. I have a patient, for example, says, "No, Dr. Ted, I've already been a year under your care, and I don't notice any difference." And I said, how many times did you get sick last year? About 6 times. This is before my care. I said, about 6 times a year. I said, how many times did you get sick last year? I said, oh my God, I never got sick last year. I said, and that's the way this thing works. But on the other extreme, the other way of patients responding is that, my God, my blood sugars are all normal. Dr. Ted, why don't you advertise your practice as something that can cure diabetes? Because I make no claims. That's a whole part of it. Is that there are no claims here. Any side effect that's beneficial is just a beneficial side effect. So in that way, we're all inclusive. So you can refer. If you don't like to review your doctor, you don't want to review your biochemistry anymore, and you want to learn about metabolomics, epigenetics, gut microbiota, mitochondria, exposomics, chronobiology, evolutionary medicine, then you just refer the patient to us.
So from the mainstream, or I guess like the typical medical establishment I think it's always interesting that sort of bifurcation around, okay, we only want to treat disease, and once you're in a healthy range, we don't want to manipulate yourself. I mean, why do you think that I'm sure you've gotten that sort of pushback.
You mean?
I'm just curious, like why? Because I think from an engineering perspective,
why fix what ain't broke, right?
But if you look at the average norms, it is clearly broken, right? Like a third of Americans are pre-diabetic and diabetic. Obesity rates up and to the right. I mean, metabolic syndromes. So I think I think when we have different, usually we invite forward-thinking doctors on this program, and it just seems like there's like a lot of just conservatism around not, you're normal. We don't want to manipulate you.
Yes, that's
why
because,
do you think that exists in
because that's how medicine is taught. You're essentially taught that these are the diseases, these are pathologies, and you treat them. After that, we don't care about you anymore. Don't want to touch you anymore. But me being me, when I lecture, I actually accuse my colleagues of one thing, because looking at it from a health perspective makes you think a lot more of more moving parts. In fact, I just had an experience lately of having a joint patient who was very wealthy with the chief of endocrinology of some major hospital, and came to my clinic, and initially arms folded and just waiting for me to make my mistake. And then I showed that I take the entire the major hormones, all of their levels, and not just one organ. I take your cancer panel, I take your inflammatory panel, and then when he took a look at what I was doing, he said, "You do all of those tests?" And I said, "Yeah, it's a network. Why don't you want to know, all of the elements, all of the nodes in the network, and what's going to move?"
Absolutely, the biohacker way, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to measure everything to understand how these things can be manipulated. If you're not measuring, then it's just like you're just shooting in the dark.
Yeah, because the problem with the patient was salt wasting, right? So I wanted to give aldosterone, which will retain the salt, right? And it said, "Why don't you just give cortisol? It's going to do the same thing." I said, "No." I said, "See, you didn't measure in the hospital. You didn't measure the cortisol levels. I did, and the cortisol is way up high.
Yeah.
So
you don't want to be jacking
So suddenly it's like and then he said, "Oh, you don't give any supraphysiologic doses. You don't give them as drugs." Yes, you use them as balancing agents. All you want to do is actually shift them to levels that are optimal for the patient, right? So after that whole experience, he got friendlier, and I was leaving my clinic. I put my arm on his shoulder and said, "Come practice this thing with me." And he says, No. He says, "I am happy with my thyroid and my pancreas." And I said, "Why?" He said, "There's too many moving parts to think about. It's easier to think about it at an organ level."
Right.
And that actually outlines the difficulty of why many are do not like to practice this type of medicine is because you are forced to look inside the cell now. You're forced to look at networks,
Right.
whereas before, you could just focus on the brain or the heart,
Yeah, that's
But
not the specialization of medicine.
yeah, but then when you realize that they're all made up of cells with certain basic requirements, then suddenly
It's
you're
one body,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
one system.
And there's a least common denominator by which they function.
Right.
They require the same things. All of them have this more or less the same structures, and there's just some specialization.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think like 3, 4, 5 years ago, when I was not as caught up to the speed in biohacking, I would have been very skeptical, because you just trust like the typical medical establishment, and then you realize, like, you look into it, you do their own research, you do your own reading, you talk to experts in this field, and it's like, yeah, medicine in a lot of ways is very medieval in being looking at the whole system as an interconnected network, like very much how you talk about it.
Yeah.
Like if you're just looking at like the liver as as neurology as just like one localized system, well, there's so many. Their diet affects, like, diabetes, which affects the liver, right?
Yes.
Like you're looking at the last effect, not the primal effect.
Yes. Well, also the focus has always been, and the entry of patients to health has
Right.
always been through disease.
Right.
And that's changing now because there's a lot of new information coming in. The media plays a large part.
I think
in,
also,
you know-
people are more educated. The decentralization of
yes,
information.
yes,
People are looking at like,
yes.
hey, we shouldn't be thinking about health only when we're sick. Let's be
Yes.
optimizing and becoming enhanced.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
That's like the whole biohacker ethos. Okay, like all can improve on this performance spectrum. Like it's kind of it's not just like you're sick, you're healthy. It's really
It's
a
a spectrum. Yeah, health is a
Let's
spectrum.
all be more to the healthy side.
Yes,
the enhanced side.
I have this definition of health that I actually like. It's very simple. It's health equals A plus B plus C.
Okay.
A is the absence of disease, and that's where the illness medicine doctors come in.
Right.
B is the balance between the catabolic processes and the anabolic processes in the body, according to C, the cycle of life of the organism.
Okay.
So when you're young, then you're geared more towards anabolism, like pediatric patients, right? And when you're older, you're geared more towards
Metabolism,
catabolism.
yeah.
So what you want to do is to balance that.
Yeah.
uh,
Anabolic is growing, catabolic is breaking down.
Yeah. Essentially by evolutionary medicine, as soon as we have our progeny, evolution doesn't want to have to do anything with us anymore.
Yeah.
But we have extended lifespans and so on. So how do we live a high quality life?
Yeah.
And between quantity and quality, people choose a higher quality life all the time, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to live a life in pain, to 100 years.
Right.
If I could live, 5 good years with high quality life, I'll take that
Yeah.
over 25 years of pain.
And then let's get quality and quantity.
Yes.
Let's get both. I think one aspect I want to dive into is metabolism. So
Yes.
a lot of the emerging research around ketone bodies, ketogenic diets, low carb, high fat diets, caloric restriction. That's been a big area of interest and research. One of our communities, the We Fast group, is one of the largest online fasting communities.
Yes.
What have you? I'm curious to get your opinion on that specific pathway.
I love it, but I also would like to say this, before you do any diet, any fasting, anything,
Yeah.
Please, the technology now exists. Get your micronutrient levels tested because before with any manipulation in your macronutrients, your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, or even caloric restriction, you are going to affect the micronutrients in your body. I mean, poor body. I mean, you know. So there is that set of optimal levels for them that you should maintain before you start going on that fancy diet or this and that diet.
Yeah.
And then for me, in terms of the different, as far as different diets are concerned, I really maintain it very simple. You manipulate your macronutrients according to your activity. So if you're going to do triathlon, et cetera, you manipulate your carbohydrates. If you're going to do bodybuilding, you manipulate your proteins. If you're going to do sit on your duff the whole day, then reduce your caloric intake and burn fats instead. It's cleaner fuel. Right. So for me personally, I am on 16-hour fast daily.
Okay.
When I'm here in the United States, that's my first meal is at noon, and I end eating at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
It's also the easiest way to get your patients or your clients to comply with any food requirements,
Yeah.
because they can manipulate their time, but not what they eat.
Yes.
Right. So that's my first advice is actually, I tell them, first the guilt, right? Humans are really so shameful as a species because they have permission to eat from the time they wake up to the time that they sleep, right? So they think about that and they feel guilty, right? And then I said, why don't you try for 2 weeks, reducing it by to 14 hours, and
Right.
next 2 weeks 12 hours, next 2 weeks 10 hours, and then the final 2 weeks 8 hours.
Yeah, no, a
Look,
16-8 fast is not that hard. It's like skipping breakfast.
yeah. Look, I am not asking you to change anything that you eat. You can dump everything else into that 8 hour time period.
Yep.
And then they ask me why, and I tell them, look, although the common analogy is that mitochondria are the batteries of your cell. They are actually your bacteria, right? I regard them more as kitchens that cook your food for you.
Okay.
So they cook the food, they produce ATP. Now, if you keep on putting food in there, it will never. It's a self-cleaning oven. It will never clean itself up. It will throw up a lot of gunk and dirt and so on, and you never clean your kitchen. But if you remove food from it for a while, then it will regenerate itself. It will
Autophagy.
clean itself. Yes, mitophagy.
Yeah.
And it will produce you new batteries for the next day. So it's a lot better for you, right?
Right.
But for me, macronutrients have to be dictated by the activity that you have.
Yeah.
And then, but what I'm strict about is always making sure that your micronutrients are optimal levels for whatever
Right.
it is that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you're just deficient, nutriently deficient, obviously if you're fasting,
Yeah.
you're worsening that problem. But I
Yeah.
think in this day and age, most Americans, most people in general are over consuming rather than under consuming.
Yeah.
Right.
Well-
but yes, get like the levels checked so you actually know what you're driving.
Yeah, this is the one thing that's nice is that if your illness medicine doctor sees, that, oh my God, it's been checked,
Right.
and oh my God, I fucking forgotten about this pathway. It's like, go back to your doctor.
Right.
It's interesting because sometimes I get calls here, and this is from doctor. It's like, Dr. Ted, he said, your patient brought his test results to me. I said, well, I told him not to bring it to you. and he says, I don't know how to read this. I said, well, I don't know how to read your test in cardiology either. So I said, send the patient back to me, right?
Right.
So that's why it's a different specialty altogether, to be able to do that. And after you get the test results back, say you tested the metabolome for the hormones and nutrients, and right, what do you do? So you have to deploy different agents of balancing, not just giving the supplements alone, but they help a lot because from my experience, I've been doing this 8 years, right? from experience is like, your patients or your clients will never eat properly. That's the number one assumption you have to make.
It's hard to put inputs in.
Yeah,
Right? It's
It's
hard.
like, here, so you shove them all. It's like, this is too much. I said, because you'll never eat properly. There's
Right.
no guarantee. And then after that, you have to take a look at the quality of their sleep. You have to take a look at their quality of their relationships with the family, their stress levels, their work. You have to take a look at their gut health. You have to look at mitochondrial health.
Right.
You have to, there was this patient that suddenly developed anemia when he moved to another house. And this was a house that's surrounded by high tension wires and so on, and those are known to cause leukemia, right? So it's like you ask a patient to move, and it's like it's an impossibility, right? So these are the kinds of things that you have to deal with. And then you take a look at the what epigenetic measures can you provide? So like for example, turmeric or curcumin and resveratrol. All of this with epigenetic effects. How relevant are they to your balancing?
Right.
So I devised this 3 layers of balancing. The first, you balance them with bioidentical nutrients and hormones.
Okay.
And the second layer would
They're
be
actually bioavailable because a lot of supplements they don't get absorbed.
Yeah,
properly.
bioidentical, bioavailable,
Right.
and bioactive.
Yeah.
It has to be in active form, like thiamine pyrophosphate, or
Right.
or 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. You have to give them the
Folic
active
acid,
form.
right,
Yeah. So.
You mentioned the gut microbiome. I think that's another area of interesting research where a lot of the data is preliminary, but a lot of researchers are excited about it.
Actually, yes, I just brought a couple of patients of mine to Germany, where the world's leading expert in adult fecal microbiota transplant actually works. And this is it's very exciting because it's a one and done kind of thing. See, in Europe, it's already approved for ulcerative colitis, IBS, IBD, right? And those are the only indications, but we're trying to establish research now between Europe and the Philippines, where we could examine, for example, its utility in Alzheimer's and depression and Parkinson's.
No, I mean, it might sound a little bit far-fetched, but there's more there's more bacteria, foreign cells, and human cells in our bodies.
Yes.
So in a lot of ways, we are more bacteria than human.
Actually, that was corrected sometime January of last year. When we say that, we're referring actually to the bacterial genome, right? But more or less our gut bacteria and the actual count is more 1:1.
Okay.
But their genetic content outnumbers us.
Okay, we'll look into the I know
let's
it's a range
see,
between 1 to 10x. No,
it's been perpetuated as such, but they did a recount, so when people ask me, it's a difference between knowing what microbiota is versus what a microbiome is. So when you're speaking of microbiome and just speaking of a genome, yes, that's true. Okay. But when you're speaking of the microbiota, and it's probably more of a 1:1 kind of thing.
But regardless, there's a lot of foreign non-human cells floating around in our systems.
And not only that, a couple of years ago, I was thinking, I said, oh my God, I said, I need to find out the communication system between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, right? So how do gut microbiota communicate with us or intestinal lining or however? And I said, if I am able to find that, then I would win my Nobel, right? And a friend of mine sends me this article that had the 3 Nobel laureates that were awarded in 2013 for exactly the same problem. Meaning they discovered the whole thing 10 years ago because Nobel lags 10 years behind, right? So, and it's a microRNA. They bud off via outer membrane vesicles, and then they deposit themselves into our intestinal cells, and they take charge of our of our genetic system. In fact, last year at Institut Pasteur, where the International Society of Microbiota conference was held, there was this fear, right, that we think we're controlling ourselves, but actually, this gut bacteria, they are in control.
Yeah.
And the founder of that, in fact, I'm inviting the founder of the World Mitochondria Society and the International Society of Microbiota. It's just one person to speak in Manila in September, and he suspects that there is actually a communication between your endosymbiont, which is your mitochondria, and your exosymbiont, which is your gut microbiota. And when I told him, Marvin, it's microRNA, he said, no, it's too complex. It's probably something simpler than that. And I said, it's microRNA. But we'll see how the whole communication turns out.
Now, that's interesting. I mean, I think, mitochondria, the theory of how they even existed were that they were swallowed by a bigger cell, and that's how you got eukaryotes. Right?
Actually, I read a better version of that it's really originally not a symbiotic relationship.
Okay.
The anaerobic bacterium, the protobacterium that was in close proximity with what was to become mitochondria, actually possessed the klepto gene. And the klepto gene steals ATP from the mitochondria. So in the course, it was more sinister than we thought. It's not a cooperative thing. Like, I want to steal the energy from you because you can produce ATP. But over time, then we dropped the klepto gene and stopped stealing the ATP from the mitochondria. And that's actually an interesting bit of evolutionary medicine in there. It's like, it's for your survival, right? So occasionally there's too much oxygen here and I cannot process any of this. So, or too little sugar that not, I cannot survive. So that was a mechanism that they had. It's
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting
Can I
that-
steal your ATP, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how like, yeah, you have like single cell creatures, and somehow you start having, organelles that are
Yes.
fairly complicated. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how all these things come together. It's-
But what's fascinating for me is, we communicate in these vast networks that are only beginning to get unraveled
Yeah.
this time. And looking at, for example, now we know that there's a prokaryotic to eukaryotic communication, right? And then it's also been shown that food itself have microRNA that can affect the behavior of your own cells,
Okay.
and then therefore your entire behavior.
Yeah.
When I was teaching Gut Microbiota 5 years ago, and no one would believe me at the time, right? When I was teaching this stuff, you went by the classic medical anatomy pathways. Like,
Right.
yeah, it communicates with the brain via the vagus nerve and via the hormone,
Leptin, ghrelin.
cortisol
Sure.
and ACTH, and by the immune system. But now, there's direct evidence that they actually communicate directly with
like
our
the
cells.
bananas micro
Yeah.
RNA is somehow.
But then you ask a doctor and said, do you know what microRNA is? You mean messenger RNA? No, microRNA. No. So these are kinds of things that we have to contend with now. But to be fair, okay, for example, going back to the subject of mitochondria, which is the subject of bioenergetics, we did present it to medical schools to be taught as a subject matter way before, years ago,
Yeah.
that there's really no time to teach any of this stuff.
Yeah.
It has to be medicine 2.0.
Yeah.
So what I've developing right now, and the reason why I'm here in San Francisco, is that the framework of health optimization medicine that I started 8 years ago. You're in the business world, and you know that you have to have your 2-minute elevator speech, right?
Sure.
Now, I have even a shorter one than that. So illness medicine diagnoses and treats disease. Health optimization medicine detects and corrects imbalances. And right now, it's at the level of the metabolome. It's because that's what we can measure. You can have people like Jack Kruse, for example, and so on, who would like to go down more to the biophysics level, to the quantum level. But if you cannot pull the entire established medicine of medicine down to the intracellular level, what more to this, optogenetics and light switching and all this kind of stuff.
I mean, I think metabolism is like a good place to start, because metabolism affects all downwards processes, right?
Yeah.
Like how our cells use and generate energy is so critical to so many pathways. So it seems like a reasonable place to
start.
have a
And
foundation.
people ask me why the metabolome, and it's really very simple, because genes can tell you what may happen, right? It's not set in stone that they're going to get activated.
Right.
So the proteome tells you what makes it happen. So you could take a look at all of the enzymes that can participate and so on. But the metabolome tells you what is happening now. So, for example, my MT HFR gene, the reductase is very much reduced in activity. I got that by genetic testing. However, by 3 previous metabolomic testings, my folate is always low, and so is my B12, and so is my B6. They're all attached to one another, right? So you know that there's probably something wrong with your gene, right? And even if you knew that your gene was reduced in activity, what do? You still give those anyway. So why not start with where you see what's actually happening and can be immediately addressed, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I know there's a lot of interest in genetics and so on, but I'm more focused on there's the gene library, but what influences its expression, right?
Yeah.
With the methylation mechanisms, for example, certain.
I think there's actually a movement towards that, because I think there's interesting metabolic theories of cancer.
Yes, by Tom Seyfried.
Yeah, he was on our show
And
actually.
I saw that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I think there's absolutely like a movement towards like, our genes get manipulated by environmental controls, like epigenetics. I mean, these things are manipulated,
and now even by gut bacteria. So it's really quite interesting. But in my practice and in my advocacy of health optimization, I found out from among illness medicine doctors, there's only really two layers that you can count on. The ones are the new graduates who have their license. They don't want to get into illness medicine because they are active in looking and seeking out for this information,
Right.
biohackers and so on
Right.
and so forth. So those people write me a lot.
Yeah.
Medical students, like we want to
You haven't gotten everything beaten out of them yet.
that's why I'm starting a certification program, right, in
Right.
health optimization medicine, not only for doctors but for practitioners.
Okay.
Because my goal is to, change the trajectory of medicine, just a little dent. Hoping that it could become the fluttering of the butterfly's wings
Absolutely, I think
that
there's
causes the
absolutely.
hurricane,
I think there's a
right?
culture.
Yeah.
There's a culture shift needed. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's one layer, and they love it. And the other ones are those who are already established in their field. For example, one prominent neurologist said, we used to say that Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease are neurodegenerative diseases.
Sure.
There's nothing we can do about them. And now Dr. Ted comes in here and says, sure, you can do something about them. And isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
That there's actually a path for us that we can do. And they are inspired. And since they hold the ears of all of these younger ones, it's the way that it can be evangelized. It's the way that it
Absolutely.
that we can.
Yeah,
However,
education.
those that are just started residency or just starting their practice, they're deaf. There's no way to get them into this.
Because they're just too plugged in.
Yes.
They're just too busy, just like cranking out clinicals.
Yeah, but the biggest untapped group are, health coaches, fitness coaches, and so on and so forth. If you provide them with the proper training, why shouldn't they be able to balance your nutrients at least? They cannot prescribe hormones,
Right.
but for health optimization practitioners, I call them HOPE, home and hope, health optimization medicine, health optimization practitioner.
Right.
And there's a lot of them. I just had a software engineer lecture me on lipid biochemistry. And I said, if this is the kind of passion that you see, why not have them certified?
Yeah.
Because they study and, you make sure
I
that...
mean, there's going to be a lot of institutional pullback from doctors being like, hey, don't come in our turf.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
but I think no matter what, people will be more educated. Like, you just cannot stop the
Yeah.
distribution of information.
No, and the thing is, actually, the illness medicine doctors don't want this turf.
Right.
Because you have to make use of the diagnostics that they have. Like, really, do you really need an MRI every year? For your annual executive checkup. Do you really need a CT scan
Right.
every year? You don't need this, but can you please get at least your nutrient metabolome tested once a year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Alzheimer's and Parkinson's as potentially a metabolic syndrome.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you mean by that, because I think there's a lot of interest around ketones as an interesting adjunct to at least be an adjunct for those diseases, not a straight therapeutic. I mean, some of the research and data we've looked at is that perhaps Alzheimer's is a glucose uptake dysfunction rather than I mean, obviously it's a complicated disease, but perhaps glucose is not being uptaken properly into the neurons, and therefore the neurons are dying. But if you can feed neurons through alternate fuel source like ketones, maybe you can rescue some of these cells. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Do you follow the work of Dale Bredesen at all? He's the one who reversed Alzheimer's, but just
Interesting.
using hormone nutrient balancing, and yeah, he's a serious neurologist. I
Right.
mean, with serious credentials.
Right.
And the time that he actually got popular was when he was able to reverse, I think, 7 out of 10 patients
Yeah.
in various different states of Alzheimer's.
Right.
And you look at his protocol, it's like vitamin optimization, and then hormone optimization, microbiota health, gut health, mitochondrial health,
Right.
and you see it. And he's published the protocol.
Interesting.
And it's exactly what I've been doing, but not even for Alzheimer's patients. This is just for my regular clients.
So you're
right?
saying the side effects.
Yeah, the side effects
Right.
is that. But the way I look at, and he has very interesting publications on, for example, Alzheimer's. For example, the formation of the neurofibrillary tangles and the formation of the plaques
tau,
and so on. Those are actually protective substances in the brain that are secreted out,
Yeah,
and which we are not able to clear
Right.
out, right? And
that's that's an interesting research. So basically, people are like, "Oh, we've got to clear this plaque," but actually, it's trying to protect.
yeah,
And it's interesting. Like, what is the cause? What is the effect?
yes, and if you look at I don't know, I think it's 7 pillars of Aubrey de Grey in Sense Foundation. One of them is the inability to clear out trash from inside your cell.
Right.
And essentially, if you take a look at the word, they're saying the same thing. It's just one of the mechanisms that's probably impaired in that. But then you take a look at Tom Seyfried's point of view on bioenergetics, or even the granddaddy of this all, the one from University of Pennsylvania, Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, the one who mapped mitochondrial Eve, Dave Wallace,
Okay.
Wallace, Doug Wallace, and he says, well, even if you're whatever it is that you do, you still need energy to actually take out the trash, continue regulation of division and all these other activities. They all need energy. So he says bioenergetics takes primacy over this whole area, and they all have valid points of view. But for me, again, we have to come back to something that's clinical. So ultimately, there's a client sitting in front of you. What the fuck do you do?
Right.
So, or the client may be an athlete, the client may be a world leader, the client may be, they have different needs. But the first thing you do is to make sure that, at least for me in my practice, their hormones and nutrients are optimal. And they want instant results, right? Look, I tell them, it took you how many years to get to this state? Why do you expect to get back to healthy overnight?
They've been accruing
right?
damage, or they're pushing their epigenetics in a certain direction over a lifestyle.
Yes.
Of dozens of years.
Yeah. So and that's it just shows you how deeply ingrained we are with illness medicine, instant results, right?
Like eat this pill and then you'll be fixed. Yeah.
And I've seen many colleagues in the anti-aging field, for example, they started hormone treatments and so on and so forth, but it's slow, going, but it's healthier, right? However,
you probably want it to be
however, if they put an aesthetic medicine practice in there with fillers and so on and so forth, that practice takes over because we're an instant gratification kind of species, right? So
that's a shame.
And the kinds of questions I get sometimes when I lecture is like, Dr. Ted, can you bank exercise the way you can bank certain things? You can't. You have to do it continuously, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's one of those things where I think is a part of the shame of the current medical establishment. Doctors don't make money to tell people to exercise.
Yes.
You make money if you tell them to take this drug. Right, like insurance only bills and pays you on certain things that you optimize for, and I don't think doctors go into it thinking, hey, I'm doing this just for money. I think all doctors are doing it to benefit the patient, but like if you're just the incentive structures aligned for certain outcomes, then you're just going to naturally gravitate towards it. The center of gravity is towards capitalism.
Yeah, that's really very interesting because I trained under William Yamamoto, who is the pioneer in medical informatics globally.
Okay.
He started the whole field, right?
Okay.
And I was in his lab for 11 years. And I did a lot of my artificial intelligence research there and so on and so forth. But we were the ones who started automating, systems of hospitals, especially the VA and all of that stuff. And of course, the main thing that we were looking at was the ICD book, International Classification of Diseases.
Okay.
And the whole reason for that is not really to classify diseases, but to provide insurance companies, labels on how much to bill. So frostbite is classified as a disease, and so is pregnancy. It's classified as a disease. So it's part of the International Classification of Diseases. And initially I said, oh, nice. I'm an illness medicine doctor. I could actually take a look at all of this list of diseases and,
get a sense of how much money I can make.
And then now you say, oh my God, this exists just for this. Really, the main purpose is for you to be able to bill your patient. You have to put a particular number, those freaking codes that you have to put in because they correspond to a certain monetary value.
Yeah, so I think it's like if the incentives lined up in that way, like if you come in with the greatest of intentions, but that's how you pay your bills, it's like hard to, yeah. So I think you really need to like break out of that framework to I think optimize for health outcomes as opposed to just treating it like a local symptom.
Yeah, well, when I looked at it, I looked at the International Classification of Diseases, and then I looked at the chart of how much each one costs. You know, you take it out of the book, then plug in, you know, what your hospital says.
Yeah.
Holy shit! I said, I feel like a prostitute, you know, for each service that I provide. I was like,
That's funny. Yeah. The special, yeah. That's funny. This is a bonus feature, like, yeah. What do you think are the interesting areas of science? I mean, so obviously it looks like you have a pretty broad perspective on some of those exciting areas. We covered metabolomics. We looked at, you talked a little bit about, microbiome.
Yeah.
I mean, there's interesting research around, I guess psychedelics or nootropics around certain cognitive functions.
Yes.
What is the most exciting, interesting field for you as you see evolving with the push of clinical research and all of that?
We discussed a little bit. What I monitor are developments, of course, in metabolomics, and then in symbiont science, which is microbiota and mitochondria, in exposomics, which is your toxic exposures and your exposure to infections like Lyme disease and stuff. Developments in chronobiology, your sleep-wake cycle and stuff. Developments in evolutionary medicine, like should you go paleo or not? Things. Developments in epigenetics. How can you manipulate the genes without actually doing CRISPR-Cas9 on your genes?
That's real biohacking. Let's actually start carving up your DNA.
I actually bought an entire lab, and it's in my.
Apparently, there was a first human embryo was implanted with a CRISPR'd genome.
Yeah,
that was just coming out of the news like yesterday.
Oh, really? Before that, the Chinese, right? The thalassemia gene. But for me personally, I have to confess, before coming here this morning, I microdosed with LSD.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then I have to confess this, right? You have brilliant listeners. I'm very sensitive to nicotine, so I had a milligram of nicotine.
Interesting.
Some caffeine, probably equivalent to like 120 milligrams.
Okay, like a cup of coffee.
Yeah, a cup of coffee. And then since I'm on a 3-hour time zone difference, and I just returned from Manila actually week before last, so I'm not really fully in my element yet.
Right.
I took a very low dose, like a 1/4 tab of modafinil. So I am all over.
So you got a real stack going on. Yeah, you got some modafinil.
No, but I think where the developments are that should be monitored and it should be allowed to get studied are actually the use of all of these scheduled substances that have a lot of nootropic value.
Yeah.
And for example. You take a look, for example, for the use of dimethyltryptamine in the treatment of alcoholism or treatment of addictions.
Or like ketamine, interesting data for depression.
For depression.
Psilocybin as well for depression.
And LSD for just a study that they finished in Switzerland for those with terminal cancers or certain death.
Or like MDMA for like PTSD.
To remove. Yeah. So I think there's where we know a lot about these things already,
right?
And we know that people are using them.
Right.
We have data on them. Why don't we just go and take a look? Because we know how to protect ourselves. The definition of a true nootropic for me is first it must be neuroprotective before it's neuroenhancing, right? So we now have stacks. So we can have a neuroprotective stack. So now let's put in some neuroenhancing stack in there. A lot of people are afraid of nicotine, for example, because of the wrong information about addiction. So there has to be.
I think nicotine is interesting, right? Like the smoke is the damaging
Yeah.
part. Nicotine itself is maybe.
Did you read that study where they tried to get the rats addicted to nicotine and they couldn't, but then they dissolved the smoke in the water, and then the rats kept on
drinking the smoky water. Interesting.
So it's those kinds of things. They are in the public awareness, but there has to be a massive re-education.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you're hitting a broader just social awareness where if we're just aliens looking at the substance regulation, it's fairly arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
Like you look at side effect profiles and then addictiveness and then legality.
Yeah.
Alcohol, tobacco, they kill a ton of people every single year. They're A-okay to use,
Yeah.
right? And then you have compounds that have, that haven't killed anyone or kill very few people, and they're very, very illegal. If you have I don't like, if we're just a biohacker or just a scientist looking at this space, we'd be like, the regulation doesn't really make sense in terms of risk to society, and then why they're legal or not legal. And like that's not even that's not like a moral judgment or an ethical judgment, just like looking at data.
Yeah.
Like these things kill people and it's legal, and these things don't kill people, they're illegal. What's going on here?
Look, this is really interesting you said that, because even in my practice, well, of course, what you want to do first is you balance the metabolome, right? And your layers will be first use bioidentical hormones and nutrients are bioactive and bioavailable. Then second, you use phytoceuticals, fungiceuticals, bacteriophages and bacteria, right? And your third level is drugs.
Right.
So when you're looking at a client, okay, now you're micronutrient optimized, now you're hormonally optimized. What's your next level to give, especially for example, for enhancing cognitive function, right? So you're at the third level already, which is the level of the drugs.
Right.
So why should I give them something that I know is not going to work versus something that I know from all of these, decades of experience and working with them, like for example, MDMA or LSD and psilocybin, etc., etc. Why don't I find ways to make them work?
Yeah.
Because we already know that they have some.
Yeah, there's definitely some, at least preclinical evidence, right?
Yeah.
And just like, it's a shame that they're scheduled and there's not more clinical research on.
Yes. So where are we to go, right? So even in for example, when I balance neurotransmitters, I do not balance neurotransmitters first. First, you balance everything that's needed by all the cells in the body, and then you take a look at the neurotransmitters. Okay, this you see that the metabolites of GABA are down, metabolites of dopamine are down, and so on. And then you consider amino acid therapy, boosting that, or give them a phytoceutical like mucuna pruriens to 3 times a week to boost their dopamine and stuff like that. And then after that, where do you go, really?
Right.
So you can only hack so much in that level. And I've been hacking for so many years now.
Right.
So, you tailor, of course, custom dose everything to what you need, right? But there's always this thing that you're actually looking for, that sweet spot, which cannot be achieved by just these things alone. You have to.
I think that's all levers. They're all tools that get you into an optimal performing zone, right? And it's just like, it's a shame, or I think it's just a disservice to not at least explore all possible levers to manipulate our own performance. Before we wrap up here, I want to get a sense of what are the most exciting projects that you personally are looking forward to? I know you said you're out to do some lectures. What are some of the things that our listeners can do to follow and get updates from you?
Actually, majority of my time is right now being spent in Asia, because right now I'm building there the first metabolomics laboratory for Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Right. So there are
So
less
like
than
a
10.
full-out lab.
Yeah, there's less than 10 of those in the world, and the research lab is completed, and then now we're looking at the commercialization phase.
Interesting.
Of it.
So this is like measuring all the cofactors.
Yeah, cofactors, vitamins, etc. Okay. The other projects I have, of course, are building a mitochondria laboratory and gut microbiome laboratory, gut microbiome, of course, is a different animal altogether. But I just want to be able to put out there all the tools that are necessary for you to be able to practice health optimization medicine, right? So you have laboratories here in the United States, there are laboratories in Europe, and there's practically none in Asia. So that's where I had this laboratories made. And of course, the company that I started there is called BioBalance. And but we cannot produce our supplements over there because of the quality control for the ingredients and so on.
Right.
They're still made for us here in the United States,
Yeah.
in Vermont, and then it's air shipped, so they don't get cooked in the shipping.
Okay.
So what I'm doing right now is just putting in all the pieces together for someone to be able to practice health optimization medicine. There's your diagnostics, and here are your therapeutics, like in illness medicine. So here are your detectors, and here are your balancers. Right?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing now.
Outputs and inputs.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so what I'm doing right now, you will hear more and more from health optimization medicine organizations soon. We're establishing this as a nonprofit organization that will provide the certification course for health optimization medicine and health optimization practice.
Yeah.
And then the other side to that is providing actually a turnkey system for you to be able to practice the health optimization, because now I finished certification. Now what, right?
Okay.
So then you can plug in the laboratories.
So you're like mini Dr. Ted's running around, spreading the
or
hope mechanism.
better than me, right? Because they're
I mean, hopefully, right? Like that's how things progress. Like you want your students to be better.
Yes.
Yeah.
But my real hope are actually the health optimization practitioners, because the reason why I'm doing this really is you can already see that illness medicine is marching and about to fall down a cliff. Why can't we do a minor course correction by just putting in a core practice in there, which should be part of the spectrum anyway, which is health optimization, and then you do functional medicine on the side, which they do diagnosis and treatment of disease, and then illness medicine. So I spoke, in fact, with about 20 functional medicine doctors in the Philippines before I came here, and I was able to convince them that, hey, the core of your practice should be health optimization rather than functional medicine, so that you don't fight with your with other doctors. But they saw that it's part of the spectrum. If you're using the same functional tests anyway, so why don't you first balance what's needed before you actually address the disease? And then from there, if you still need illness medicine, of course, they're great at accidents and all of this acute stuff. Then apply them, and there's a place for everyone. But let's supply the missing piece. So hopefully, we're able to provide the first module on health optimization by the end of this year. Hopefully, the software is done at the time. By that time, on metabolomics, and then there are going to be 6 other modules from there.
Yeah, no, very exciting. We'd love to keep in touch and get that update and help distribute the message. I think this is a really fun, like, free flowing conversation. I mean, we touched upon a lot from bioenergetics and the mitochondria to microdosing LSD. So
I hope that effect is not from. This is my normal. It's not from my stack.
Oh yeah, no, I can tell. I mean, I think that's like what kind of spirit and innovation and creativity we need in the space. I think, look at the macro trends. 1/6 of American GDP is going to healthcare, and like no one's really happy with it. So I think there needs to be sort of kicks and turns and punches into the system to see, hey, can we improve the system? Like every system can be improved. So let's all work together to improve the broader system here and change the culture around that system.
And actually, more than that, I think change the consciousness around it.
Yeah.
If we can change the consciousness around it to something that's more of genuine compassion, rather than, we're driven by a lot of the capitalism and all of that. So that's fine, but at this day and age, when we know a lot more about ourselves, why don't we infuse the proper compassion into all of these practices? And the first compassion should be towards ourselves, right? Like, look at us, what's happening to us, So if we're able to do that, then raise consciousness and raise awareness, then we would have done our jobs.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks, Dr.
All
Ted.
right. Thank you.
Cheers. And as always, follow us on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and YouTube. We'll also post links to our Dr. Ted's information if you want to follow up and learn more about his practice and his frameworks. As always, thanks so much for joining us, and see you next time. Cheers.